Okay. Okay, good evening again. And welcome to the first official workshop of the Community-Based Leadership and Sustainability events. My name is Maria Topalovic. I am the chair of the Sustainability Professionals Network. So if you haven't been to an SPN event before, welcome, because this is partially ours, as we are one of the collaborators of this initiative. So thank you very much for coming, first of all, and for being here to talk about our city streets. So everyone probably has a positive experience, a negative experience, a whatever experience with their streets, and we look forward to hearing from the experts on our streets tonight, as well as from all of you. And there will be plenty of time to share your thoughts and ideas. I think some of you have already started in the back, so we'll talk a little bit more about the transportation showcase back there, but there's a lot of opportunity here tonight, and really it all is about community engagement. So it's great to see so many of us out. So thank you for coming. Now I'm going to really hope that my clicker works. There we go. So our order of events for this evening, after I stop talking up here, is we will hear from each expert here this evening, and I'll introduce each of them before their presentation begins. We'll then have a panel discussion and question and answer period moderated by Ryan McGreal. And after that, we will have the opportunity for a networking session, and as I mentioned, to provide your feedback at the Transportation Showcase. So very quickly, so what is the Community-Based Leadership in Sustainability Initiative? Community members got together and who formed different groups such as the Sustainability Professionals Network, which I represent, McMaster, Sustainable Hamilton, and some other partners, and thought that we should have these workshops focused around sustainability. And why not start off with sustainable transportation, because I think it's everyone's favorite topic in Hamilton right now anyway. And all of these workshops are really focused on that sustainability education, community engagement, and fostering collaboration, as well as really a culture of sustainability. So we look forward to seeing all of you out at our next set of events, and we'll talk more about that later in the evening. But there will be more workshops throughout 2015. So what is the Sustainability Professionals Network? If you don't know already, we're a group of professionals trying to connect existing groups and individuals who are either interested in, studying, already working towards building a more sustainable Hamilton. And as I mentioned, if you hadn't come out to our events before, thank you for coming tonight, and we hope to see you out at more of them. And other ways to get involved, while I have all of your attention here, of course, a small plug, is you can email us, join us on Twitter or on Facebook, and every other method of social media out there. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you about how to build a more sustainable Hamilton for all of us. So I'll stop talking now, because you probably really want to hear from these people. So we will start off our first presentation for the evening. We have Peter Topalovic, who is the project manager for transportation demand management at the City of Hamilton, and he will really set the stage on what's happening in Hamilton and define complete streets in the Hamilton context. So a round of applause for Peter.
There's no relation. Maria's my sister. Same last name. Okay. So now, my job first, this is actually a series of presentations that 3 people originally came together with to talk to the community, engage people on complete streets. It's a new sort of, some people call it a buzzword. It's a movement to other people, and we really want to get the word out there. What does it mean for Hamilton? What do they mean at all? What is a complete street? So does everyone here think they know what a complete street is already? There's a few. Okay. 30% of the room. It probably means something different to everyone, depending on who you are. But we understood that the city can't be the only person involved or the only player involved in complete streets. You need to work with your not-for-profit groups and also the community. So we thought of ourselves as Peter, Paul, and Mary as an example, or some famous trio. For lack of a better trio. But today we're actually introducing a 4th person to the group. Peter, Paul, Mary, and Paul. Maybe not the best example to use, but I think it really does show that this is really a multi-stakeholder initiative and a multi-stakeholder idea in itself. So we're really talking today about how do we move from auto orientation to equitable streets. And so I thought of love your streets and sort of love your car. We've got a lot of imagery. I'll talk a little bit about the imagery of autocentricity. And just quickly, you know, we're going to talk about, obviously, complete streets. I'm going to bring the city perspective in. Sarah Mayo is going to talk about building a framework. And then Matt Sweet's going to really talk about the technical aspects and the perspective of the engineer. And finally, we're going to talk about the community and how they can get engaged. So this is the glass half full or half empty? About 50% of all trips in Hamilton were under 5 kilometers. How does that break down? I'm going to give an oversimplified breakdown here. Basically, about 83% were taken by vehicle of some sort, driver, carpooling, taxi, motorcycle. About 9% were by transit, and 7.5% were walking and cycling together. So the walking and cycling is a little bit low, if, you know, at least from my perspective, especially in the kind of work that I do. So we see that someone could say, well, there's a bit of a problem here, right? Why is this happening? And beyond there being a problem, what does this mean for our roads? You know, obviously, if we have to accommodate that amount of automobiles take up more space. So we have an infrastructure problem because we have to either accommodate for the growth in the automobile or try to find other ways to use our streets more equitably and efficiently. This kid's really upset because even worse than the 5 kilometer numbers is the 1 kilometer numbers. So 55% of all trips 1 kilometer or less taken in the city were by automobile. So that means a 1 kilometer trip's about maybe a maximum of 15-minute walk. More than half of those trips were taken by automobile. He's upset, but I'm kind of happy about that because it represents there's a great potential out there to shift people to other modes. So while yes, it's not the best statistic, it means that we have the ability, because 1 kilometer trips to shift to different modes is actually quite easy, I hope. So why is this the case? Well, infrastructure probably, maybe we don't have the right infrastructure out there. Maybe there's not enough sidewalks or they're not wide enough, or maybe there's not enough bike lanes. Perhaps we live in an auto-oriented culture. Perhaps there's a lack of congestion on the street, right? If there's no congestion, then it's easy to drive. There's a lot of cars, so the cars are highly available and you can grab one very easily. And there's also a lack of awareness of health impacts. So what are the impacts of always sitting? You know, I think that car culture has contributed to that, and we're not always understanding, you know, people don't make a causal connection to the amount of sitting that they do and its impact on their health. And of course, maybe the city was designed for auto use. So we have all these different reasons. I just want to explore, I'll start with cultural reinforcement. I don't know if you've ever seen this series before by General Motors. It got pulled off very quickly. So you won't be able to see it. You have to look at it. You have to Google it, I guess. But the campaign was called Reality Sucks. And in this picture, it says, stop pedaling, start driving. So again, this reinforcement in our culture, people understand this, and this is not to point out, not to harp on GM, but they understood, the people understand that this could sell a car. Even more interesting was this one, the one on transit, number 23, Creeps and Weirdos. Luckily, there's an affordable alternative. And then the last one, you see someone's walking in the rain, and look how inconvenient it is. She's so upset because the car has you know, I wish she was in the car. If she was in the car, it would be better. So there's obviously this idea in North American culture that driving is an important right, and it's more convenient, and it sells. It's being used to sell. Although they got in a lot of trouble, so they didn't use it very well. Although I think I'm selling cars for them right now. Hopefully not. Let's look at the other side, land use, right? So we have, yes, there's cultural reinforcement. What about land use? Let's look at James Street South. It is, obviously you probably know where it is, it's just down the street. It's got a historical grid pattern, one of our oldest streets in the city. It's got mixed use, commercial and residential, so you can live there, you can shop there. It's a major employment node, the hospital, the GO station's right there. It's definitely walkable and transit friendly, we probably can't argue that. And this kind of design encourages active transportation. So in these kinds of communities, it's much easier to walk or cycle or take transit. And let's look at a different, same name, street of the same name, but Upper James Street right there. It is a little bit different from, this is post-war, right, after 1950s development. We have a single use of just commercial in one side, and over here we have residential. And you can see we have cul-de-sacs, which is important to make sure that we don't have that much car traffic infiltrating into the neighborhood, but at the same time that limits transit connectivity. And because it's a little bit more low density, it doesn't make transit as viable. Now, this is not to point out, this is not how we're generally developing residential developments today, but I wanted to point it out because this is typical in North America. And this is part of why people would be encouraged to drive 1 kilometer or less. Because it's not clear, actually, how would you walk across to the development. And once you're in the development, you're encouraged to drive between stores. Again, I don't want to criticize, I work for the city, I don't want to criticize it too much, but this is historical land developments. We're not talking about decisions that were made yesterday. So, complete streets. This looks a little bit different than some of the streets you see on your regular travels, but they really are just streets that meet the needs of all road users of all ages and abilities. And when I say road users, notice I don't say all vehicle types. I don't say buses and cars, I say people. Because essentially, streets are moving people. And there's a whole bunch of design things that this sort of runs the gambit, right? This is like the most ideal complete street on Earth. It's got bike lanes, it has a green buffer, it has street trees, it has pedestrian refuges so you can easily cross the street, it's got a transit shelter. So it's a fairly, they put all the complete streets in one street. That may not be every street, so we'll talk more about that. But it's really a balancing act. So, we have, I said road users. These road users can compete against each other, right? Cyclists need cycling lanes, pedestrians need extra wide sidewalks, transit users need better access to transit stops. Young people have different needs over older adults, and there's people with mobility challenges. So even within the groups that we're talking about, there can be conflicts. And how is this street, any street, going to meet all those needs? For instance, you only have a certain amount of space. If you're building an extra wide sidewalk, how are you going to put in a bike lane? And you still want two-way traffic, one way in each direction. This can be a very important design challenge. So let's take this street, and I'll start with, this is not in Hamilton. Is this a complete street? Likely, based on what I said. Especially you see the Desire line in the green space there, and that's a transit stop. So how are you getting people to the transit stop? Not very easily, right? Especially if you had any type of mobility challenge, that becomes even more difficult. Another example, my favorite, is the sidewalk to nowhere. It makes sense in terms of when you build a development because, the money ended here. The developer built to here. Obviously. Interesting enough in this picture, caution, deaf and blind children. Again, definitely not a Hamilton street. But, also signs like, beware of pedestrians and cyclists. So this is something you have to be aware of them. Be careful. They might come and find you. They might jump at you. And this one, I have no comment. It's a very wide street, very hard to cross. Again, we're likely not going to build streets like this in the future. Okay, what about this street? It's not fancy. Oh, I'm clicking both things at once. It's not fancy. It used to be 4 lanes. Now it's 3 lanes. And there's a bike lane. Does anyone know where the street is? You call it out? Stone Church. It's Stone Church. So there's this idea that complete streets is only for the downtown and only for urban cores. But no, complete streets actually is one of those things that can happen anywhere. I couldn't say that it's easy to get transit everywhere in a city, especially where there's no density. But we can put complete streets anywhere and everywhere there are people and there are destinations. So this is a good example of something that I wouldn't say it's that fancy, but by all means, it's better than a road than it was, 4 lanes with no other accommodations, and it's doing the job for the location that it's in. So I give that a green check mark. And then here's another one. You probably know this, King William Street, and it's a one-way street. It's going in one direction. It's only on one lane. But look at all the amenities that are there. There's bike parking. There's places to sit. There's extra wide sidewalks. It looks very nice. The road looks like it's made to look like it's historic. There are some street trees. This, for all intents and purposes, is also a complete street. So I think they really come in very many different shapes and sizes. And, I'm going to give that the green check mark as well. And we could keep going, obviously, street over street, and to say, well, are they complete or not? And, we may have different opinions of what. You may disagree with me, and that's totally fine. Lots of people do. But, at the end of the day, we are looking at a toolbox that we have, and we're taking tools based on the street and the context. So it's definitely a complementary idea, complete streets, but it's not a silver bullet. Because there's all kinds of things that have to go with it. One important one that I kind of talked about already is land use. At some point, yes, we can put the facilities in, but will people use them? There's the idea of parking. Is it free? Are you charging for it? That has a huge behavior change component to it, whether there's congestion or not. So there's all kinds of other things that really play into the sustainable mobility picture. But certainly from a technical aspect, we can design complete streets anywhere. So again, lots of questions that have been asked in the community lately. Separation versus mixed, like the Cannon Street bike lanes versus the bike lanes on York Boulevard. Two-way versus one-way. Do all streets have to be two-way, or can they be one-way? Wide sidewalk versus bike lane. Parking used as a buffer for a bike lane instead of bollards. So we have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of different complicated, there's no right answer to some of these problems. But we as a community have to come together, and that's partially why we are all here talking together today, because it really isn't something that one engineer can just decide and design. So we have a lot of tools, and they have to be applied depending on the context. However, I want to now talk about the successes. He's very happy about these things. I think we're better off than some other cities. We've got a lot of quick wins projects I'm going to talk about. We've got a pedestrian mobility plan, which you might have heard of. We're building some more bike lanes and bike parking, and we are just about to undertake a fascinating one-year transportation update. If you're a planner, that sounds fascinating. Anyone else, it's potentially boring. We're going to try to make it really interesting. York Boulevard, I kind of mentioned it, but before it was 5 lanes. After it's a two-way street. It has interesting pedestrian crossings. It's got some street trees and landscaping, and has a bike lane. Even York Boulevard recently been redone. We put in some places where you can cross against that big green boulevard in the middle, and we have a buffered bike lane. Victoria Avenue, it's a one-way street, but we put in a buffered bike lane, and we add some pedestrian amenities, and without compromising much traffic flow, but adding more space for people. When I talked about the pedestrian mobility plan, you don't need to read all these things, but this is an example of all the tools that we can use street by street to improve the pedestrian experience. And we have this toolbox now. We've done the research, we know what can work, and all we have to do is pull out that toolbox. And it's not like we're going to identify, these are the pedestrian corridors. It's not some kind of master plan that says, okay, this will be pedestrian and this will be truck. No, any street that we look at, we can take from the toolbox. The toolbox is very big. One that was along the street, this is how we have all kinds of tools to cross the street. I won't go into them, we can talk about them after. We're looking at enhancing transit stops. That's part of it as well. Having bike parking at transit stops, having more seating at transit stops, perhaps showing the next bus time, like the McNabb terminal does. We've got a bus-only lane. Controversial, of course, but one-year pilot. Now it has fresh paint, so you can see it again. Fairly controversial, but we talked about separation versus non-separation, and depending on the street, you may need to separate your mode. Whether it's the Cannon Street bike lanes or the bus-only lane, this can guarantee better travel times and increase convenience of the other modes, not just the automobile. This is this is the Strategic Road Safety Program. We have 40+ enhanced crosswalks that we put in. Why do we put them in? We had a plan, but we heard from the public through tactical urbanism. So you can see on the left, those are the pylons that were lovingly placed to show that where citizens want more protection for the pedestrian. And then in the next picture, you can see the city came in and engineered it their way. And then eventually we actually put in concrete here to match that. So that's now a better, more safer intersection. And that happened because of the public showing interest and saying, hey, we need this. but also us having the will to do it. I think we all know the Cannon Street cycle track. Everyone's going to talk about it, so I won't mention it too much. But this is a one-way street. I think it's much more complete with a lot of the infrastructure that we placed in here. And again, we're accommodating cyclists really well. And from the preliminary information that I have, it isn't compromising the average travel time on the street. North End Traffic Management Plan. If you didn't live in the North End, you probably are very familiar with this. 30-kilometer-hour streets, but we didn't just put up signs. That generally doesn't change behavior. There's some two-way street conversion, there's bump outs, and there's bicycle boulevards and other techniques that we're using in that community to make it more pedestrian safe and friendly. We've been actually recognized for both being a walk-friendly city and a bicycle-friendly community. And I'm a little biased because this is one of my projects as well, but Hamilton Bike Share, 750 bikes, 100 hubs, Dundas to the stadium. We talk about complete streets. It's not just about paint on the road. It's about what facilities you have, whether it be a bike parking spot, whether it be a bike share provisions, or buffered parking along the side so the pedestrian has more safety. It could be all kinds of different. This is one of the ones I like the best, but I'm biased. It's a little bit revolutionary for Hamilton. Bixby uses the Smart Dock in 2005. You can see the third picture there. And that's where the bikes are dumb, but you go up to the kiosk and you use the kiosk and you get a bike. In the Sobe system, the bikes are smart, so that you can walk up to the bike and you just interact with the bike itself, and it could be parked at any old bike rack if you so choose. So it's a little bit different. It's a lot more flexible, and it's quite a bit cheaper. So we can get a lot of bikes around the city. They work with a smartphone or a computer, and you can book them out. You can actually reserve them, or you can find them on your smartphone and then walk up to a bike and tap it and take it. Very interesting, because they have GPS, we can find out a lot about where people want to travel, and then base our cycling infrastructure, or even walking infrastructure, or any kind of infrastructure planning in the future based on actual travel patterns. It's very hard for a planner to get data like this, and the Bike Share will be able to give that to us. And it's the fastest growing mode of public transportation in the world right now. And you can see that's the number of worldwide systems, and you can see the growth as of 2007. In North America, there's 50 systems and counting. And I think 4 years ago, there were 3 or 4. So you can see there's an exponential growth. The question marks are cities that are planning, and the green ones are the ones that actually have systems. And it's probably a really good mode of transit to fill the gap between trips that are too far to walk and too short to drive. So we're talking about complete streets and how people can get to transit or their destination. We have to make sure they can get there in different ways. Consultation is very important, like tonight, and we're having an engagement, and we have a transportation showcase up there to get your input. We did offline and online communication with the Bike Share program. We tried to be very innovative on how to get people to tell us where they want stations. That led to the red dots, which are stations that were not planned originally, but through public input, they actually made it onto the map. So this is an example where we can actually engage people, whether it be a complete street design or a bike lane design or a new road, to ask people what they want on that road and how they want it to look for them. So it's sort of a little bit of more direct impact from the actual community. And I know that sometimes, all of us get up here and we seem like, maybe we're granola crunchers, or I don't know, what's the different words you want to use, right? Environmentalists, even. Dirty word. But this, next slide. Oh goodness. Here we are. Dirty word. But no, I think that it's not about cars versus this versus that. I know there's a lot of conflicts on the street, but we want to do everything, but we want to do everything in a I think of the Canada Food Guide, fruits and vegetables, walking and cycling, then transit, carpooling, and then your single occupant vehicle. So we want to be able to accommodate everything, but we have to accommodate them in different proportions. And finally, I talked about a lot of great ad hoc, cute projects. Some are great, some are small, some are big. But how are we going to operationalize this for the future? Because we want to be able to do this on every street, everywhere in the city, not just in ad hoc places downtown or, in some examples in every ward. The way to do that is our transportation master plan. I'm fascinated by the process. It could be boring to others. We really want to engage people in it because this is the blueprint on how we move forward, whether it be complete streets or new roads, two-way conversions, whatever it might be. We're actually reviewing it and updating it this year. So I hope you can get involved in that. That's my plug for that. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're going to take your computer? Oh, wait.
Introduce you.
Oh, yes, right.
Do you need, you don't want Great. Thank you, Peter. I didn't mention before, but I noticed on Twitter a lot of you are already tweeting. You can use the hashtags #LoveYourStreets and also HAMCLS, so like Hamilton and then CLS for our initiative. So if you haven't already started doing that, please feel free. And then, you know, people who aren't here can take part by reading our tweets. Anyway. Our next speaker is Sarah Mayo. She's a social planner with the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton, and she will focus on the importance of policy and building a framework basing on the foundation and moving on to continue what Peter was already talking about. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to present some SPRC research, so the Social Planning and Research Council research and analysis on complete streets. So the main objective right now of the Transportation Master Plan that was done in 2007 is to have a balanced transportation network. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just kind of vanilla, boring, and doesn't really convey that, you know, we actually have to change our transportation network. And balance doesn't convey that. And also the Transportation Master Plan doesn't have too much detail about, well, how do you balance? That's like, so it leads to things like this. So this is one of our friends in the back there sent an email about a certain pedestrian light and was given an answer that, well, we can't really change it because we have to balance the transportation network. And these are all the things we have to balance. It's so difficult. And so one of the things that the city said they had to balance was minimizing the impact on the environment, in brackets, emissions of stopped vehicles. So basically using the dominance of cars and the pollution that they create as a reason to further allow them to continue and never actually kind of put a stop to or restrict cars in any way. And so this kind of criteria would not be compatible with a complete streets policy, even though a complete streets policy is very much compatible with environmentalism and sustainability. In terms of the application of it, we don't look at the emission of vehicles as a reason to change how we build our streets, or certainly not to promote more, not stopping cars because of the pollution. So the Social Planning Council has done a draft complete streets policy, which I'll get to in a bit more. And one of the things that it promotes is we've taken bits from all sorts of complete streets policy across North America, and this one is in it, and it's from Victoria, and not the city, the Transportation Institute there, and Todd Littman has 6 criteria, which are really great criteria. Cost-effective mobility, overall accessibility, fairness for non-drivers, user convenience and comfort, safety and security, local economic development. And then for us at the Social Planning Council, fairness for non-drivers is kind of one of the key reasons that we're involved in campaigning for complete streets, because it's an equity issue for us. So who are non-drivers in Hamilton? Certainly we see in the first slide, these are different groups who often face racism, discrimination in the labor market, face lower wages, and so we're looking at people who identify with a visible minority group, women, female lone parents, people with disabilities, and Aboriginals all have higher rates of using transit, walking, cycling, etc. And then we see a similar pattern with income, although cycling is kind of fairly even among all the income groups, and so it's kind of the most egalitarian, in a way, mode of transportation. Here's what am I pointing at? Here's another way to look at fairness for non-drivers. And if any volunteer here wants to do a similar picture that we could do for the King Street bus lane, please come and talk to me or Pete, because we'd love to do a similar picture. This is Ottawa. I'm going to talk a bit about how a complete streets policy would make a difference in a concrete example. In about 2 years ago, in December 2012, Kitty McLeod died at this intersection, was killed by a driver at Governor's Road and Overfield. Right by St. Joseph's Villa, there's bus stops there, there is lots of apartment buildings, major destination of St. Joseph's Villa. There is a big hill to go down to the light or up to the next light, and lots of quick traffic. And so really difficult to cross. And so people complained and said, hey, in 2010, they asked the city, please, our family members are here and we'd like to cross. And they got 600 signatures. And the city said, well, there's not really enough people to justify it right now, and we're planning to improve the road anyway in 2017. So we don't have the money to do it now. We're going to wait, or it's not urgent enough. And a complete streets policy would change that in some ways, because it would say, well, you know what? It's not just how many people are crossing the road, because you're not counting how many people are not crossing because it's so dangerous. And so we have to look at the potential projections about potential increase in users after safety improvements. And safety improvements don't have to wait until kind of major infrastructure cycles. They can be made right away in repair and maintenance activities. And then in a complete streets policy, exceptions have to be documented, publicly documented and approved at a high level, so that it's not just kind of some invisible unknown that you never can find out why, that it really becomes more public. But unfortunately, we didn't have a complete streets policy, and Kitty McLeod was died. It died in 2012, and in 2013, the city finally installed a pedestrian island. It's not perfect. There's lots of people who still have problems with that intersection, but it's certainly a big improvement. And these are the 10 people who've died, including Kitty. And Kitty's death was a real a watershed moment, I think, in Hamilton, because there was a lot of people already involved in these issues who really kind of started being like, wow, we need to work even harder on these issues. And I think city staff, too. We've seen a lot of changes in the last 2 years, and I think Kitty's death was part of that in terms of wanting to prevent a tragedy like that. And so these are the 10 places where pedestrians were killed in the last 2 years in Hamilton. And the last one was in Dundas as well, actually. A 19-year-old was killed on Coots. And so because of these tragedies, and because everyone, we're all pedestrians, all drivers, everyone is a pedestrian. Complete Streets is really becoming a motherhood and apple pie issue. There's a lot of consensus in our community across North America that this is something that needs to change, and that's a great thing. And so we did a survey of candidates for election at the municipal election, and there was a huge percentage of people, so almost 80% of people said adopting complete streets policy, a robust complete streets policy, is very important, not just important, very important. So that was great to see. And so in the US, 600 cities have started, have adopted a complete streets policy of some kind. And this is also part of the reason why complete streets get so much consensus. How many people, so these are all sorts of tweets about over the last few months about the Cannon Street bike lane, about people just, loving it in some way or another, right? It's saving their lives. It's like they're gonna, move to a house near there. And that picture, who can't smile with that picture, right? So who here has cycled the Cannon Street bike lane and has felt those endorphins, has felt their mental health improve? Okay, I'm gonna take a picture of this. I gotta take a picture of that. Okay, because that's exactly it, right? We all feel that that improved mental health from that kind of infrastructure. How many people have felt that same kind of feeling when driving on a highway? None, okay. Even a new highway? Did anyone feel that on the Red Hill? No? So that's part of why Complete Streets is a great issue to work on. Sometimes I feel like we have to make sure that we don't ignore other issues that are maybe don't give us those endorphins, but are still really important. But in terms of Complete Streets, we have to, there's a lot of consensus, but we need to push a bit further than that consensus and get into some issues where there's going to be more debate and it's going to get harder to convince people. So making sure that the policy is robust and that it will be worth the extra effort. So we saw that in our Complete Streets survey of candidates. You know, kind of when we asked them some details, the level of support went down a bit. But still pretty high, so we're still happy. Oh, I didn't know it was still going to do that. So this is the outline of the policy, and it's available. There's a URL up there, tiny URL / Complete Streets Policy Hamilton. And I'm not going to really talk about it. There's copies of it on that table if anyone wants to look at it. But you know, accountability is a big part of it too. At the bottom, progress reporting and measures of success. So that I don't have to do all this. The city should be doing this. As you'll see, I'm going to do a little bit of data. There's some info sheets on the table. I'm just going to finish with a few things. And so if anyone wants, I also have color copies if anyone wants color copies, but I didn't print them all in color. And so these are just info sheets for you as people who are like-minded and want to see these kind of improvements on our streets. Have some data in your back pockets to use when you're talking to people about these issues. So quickly, this is the progress on the bike network in Hamilton, 20-year plan. When the city adopted it, city staff said, well, we want to do this over 20 years, but actually looks like we only have money to do about half of it. So we're only going to concentrate on the urban bike lanes, and the rural part, we've got this whole huge map of rural bike lanes, paved shoulders, but we're not going to do it basically. And so they've only put in about 4 kilometers of paved shoulders when they should be putting in like 200 or 300. So as we can see, there's a big gap between implementation and the target. And so that really shows that we need to do more advocacy to have bigger budgets so that the bike lanes can be put in. But when we do that advocacy, we shouldn't be doing it just to say, yeah, me as a cyclist, I want that paved shoulder. We have to remember, we have to really take it from these infrastructure improvements for bicycles improve life for everyone. It's not just for a special interest group. It is really to improve our city for everyone. So in the info sheets, we have specific references to research that shows that everyone benefits from lower air pollution. Even when a bike trip doesn't replace a car, the increased physical activity improves people's health, which decreases health costs, which helps everyone, right? So there's specific studies that show specifically that the benefits are in the range of 10 times bigger than the investment. And neighborhood sales at neighborhood stores increase, lower repair costs on roads, a buffer for pedestrians, so they're further from the cars. Really, bicycle facilities help everyone. And one of the main reasons that the return on investment on cycling is so high is that they're so cheap. This is at the top various road projects in Hamilton that have happened recently, and then the bottom is cycling facilities that are in progress or have happened. And we see even the most expensive ones are still so much cheaper. This is per kilometer, so we're comparing apples to apples here. So much cheaper than anything that's on a road, other road projects. This is another infographic we have about road, kind of the transportation master plan had all sorts of stuff, had great stuff about cycling and pedestrian stuff, but it also had lots on what kind of roads need to be built to accommodate growth. And so there's good news and bad news in this. The good news is that they haven't expanded roads as much as they were supposed to. It was supposed to, by 2011, be twice as much as they have, so they've only got 50%. And is that, the question is that because there wasn't enough money or because they realized that's the wrong priority? That's not clear. But the bad news is that road efficiency projects are even less likely to have been done. Finally, this was kind of part of the data I presented to council last year in terms of how much Hamilton has a high rate of pedestrian deaths in Ontario. In 2010, we were the second city in Ontario. Finally, let's keep in touch. I have on the, please pick up an info sheet if you want, and then also I have a sign-up sheet in terms of if you want to endorse the draft Complete Streets policy, please go ahead. Do you want to get involved in improving streets in your own neighborhood? I can connect you with that. We're developing a guide for that as well. And if you want to help with citywide advocacy campaigns or attend other events like this, let us know. And then my little plug also in terms of just generally, for those of you who don't know the Social Planning and Research Council, I always encourage people to sign up to our newsletter, find out about all our other projects too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. And I would definitely second that endorsement of the Complete Streets policy. So if you haven't checked that out already, do. I'm a little bit biased because I love everything about Complete Streets, but it's fantastic. It's a great read, and a lot of really great work went into building that. So next we have Matt Sweet. He is the TDM coordinator for the City of Cambridge, and he will talk about the role of the traffic engineer in Complete Streets. Thank you, Matt.
So just for everyone's information, Peter, way back at the beginning of his presentation, talked about Peter, Mary, and Paul, and the other Paul or something to that effect. I would be the other Paul. I'm sort of the fourth spoke on the wheel here tonight. Peter, Justin, and Sarah have presented together previously on this subject, but due to my involvement with Sustainability Professionals Network, I wanted to have some kind of a role here tonight and participate somehow. I wasn't really sure how to do that, though, because, like I say, these three had sort of a cohesive presentation put together for themselves and are obviously very good speakers. I hesitate to call myself an expert yet. I'm only really 3 years into the profession. I've been with Cambridge now for 3 months, and I'm also a sessional faculty at Mohawk College teaching transportation engineering technologists about active transportation. So with that in mind, while I was looking for a purpose for my presentation, I happened to read the description for today's event, and not that this is a bad thing, but there was sort of a little pot shot in there to traffic engineers. And I thought to myself, oh, hey, I have an angle now. I know what I'm going to talk about. And again, it's not that I'm up here to defend the profession of traffic transportation engineering. I'm not necessarily here to do that. But there are some, the way that the profession has interacted with active transportation, transit, and complete streets is evolving and hopefully improving. So I wanted to sort of give a snapshot of that and try to give some context as to where the rotten traffic engineers might be coming from. So this is the sort of things that those rotten traffic engineers tend to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Design, planning, operations, et cetera. A lot of places have dedicated staff just for parking. That might seem strange, but it's true. And the active, sustainable, alternative transportation modes tend to sort of get put off to the side and have their own dedicated staff. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It's good to have people championing specific initiatives, particularly around active transportation and alternative transportation, but that can also bring some detriments as well. So how are those rotten traffic engineers sort of trained, and where is their focus? First principles, they are trained to focus on automobile movement, and that is reflective of the fact that they're trained to deal with the situation that they find on the ground when they get into the profession. We have a legacy in North America, much as other places have legacies around sort of the car culture and very auto-centric development. You know, traffic engineers are trained with that focus. Liability issues really are paramount, and liability can be a big thought stopper for transportation traffic engineers. Anytime they see something that their concern might come back to the municipality in the form of a lawsuit if somebody gets hurt or killed, now all of a sudden they want to put a stop to any sort of unique or innovative suggestions. So there's a lot of work that has to go into getting around this liability concern. Treat pedestrians and cyclists as a form of delay to automobile movement. More detailed planning and design principles come later and have to overcome embedded concepts. So again, if the first principles have to deal with automobile movement, operations, design, the other stuff sort of comes in at the end, and we have to try to shoehorn it in. Not just in terms of the actual physical road space, where we have to shoehorn in cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, but in the headspace of the transportation engineers. And there's been that tendency for center line out planning and design. Basically, we plan and design for the actual automobile space in the right-of-way first, and then the rest we can fit in if we can. To Hamilton's credit, from a policy perspective, that is no longer Hamilton's standard practice. Hamilton, in policy, does edge of right-of-way in as a focus. So in other words, dealing with pedestrian, cyclist realm, transit, and then ultimately the automobile space. But when dealing with sort of the traditional traffic engineering mindset, we have to overcome some issues of language. So capacity of a street can mean a couple of different things depending on who you're talking to. The traditional traffic engineering perspective looks at capacity, roadway capacity, as an automobile issue and a measurement. Whereas from a complete streets perspective, we look at capacity not just as automobiles, but all the other different modes. We talk about it as terms of destinations, in terms of land use, all sorts of different things. So there are some shifts happening in the profession. There are new trends in modeling, which are trying to capture from a data perspective different modes of transportation in a useful way that we can actually incorporate it better into future projects. New standards, which I'll get into in a second, with a specific example. So new design standards, operation standards, which again try to give us a good reference point with which to build and operate active transportation facilities, transit facilities, et cetera. New metrics for successful street projects. So how do we define a successful street project? And dedicated staff for active transportation and TDM. I mentioned I've been in Cambridge for 3 months. It's a brand new position. So there was no TDM coordinator before I came along, and that is becoming more common. A lot of municipalities now have dedicated staff working on transportation demand management, which is focused on all these different things that we're talking about. Again, it comes with the danger that there's a potential for siloing where those dedicated staff are sort of the holders of all of that information, and other staff in the department don't feel the need to consider it because that's somebody else's responsibility. Ultimately, the long-term vision should be to, I feel like, put myself out of a job so that everybody in the city would adopt these principles. I heard that alarm too. I guess that's nothing. So I mentioned new standards, something that we have now in Ontario, a new Ontario Traffic Manual, Book 18, which delves entirely into cycling facilities from an infrastructure and operations perspective. This is something we haven't had before in Ontario, a manual that all practitioners can go to and have standard approaches to cycling infrastructure. And everything in this book can legally be implemented right now. So that's something, like I say, we didn't have before. It took a few years to get developed, and there are different provincial initiatives which are working to formalize this and actually enhance it. Just gonna keep going. So I just wanted to do a bit of before and after in terms of sort of what the old approach to a cycling or complete streets project might have been from sort of a, like I say, an older transportation engineering perspective, and where we're heading towards and how we're trying to improve that. This is a section of Kenilworth Avenue in the East End, close to actually where I live. And this section has been traffic calmed, in air quotes, simply by posting 40-kilometer-per-hour signs. So the speed limit was reduced just with signage, but no actual design changes to the roadway itself. So it's really an enforcement issue, and actually this request came from the community. The community wanted the city to address speeding concerns on Kenilworth. This leads to the traffic circle and then the Kenilworth access, for those who aren't as familiar. So there's a speeding issue out there, so the response from the city at the behest of the community, quite frankly, was to just post lower speed limit signs and then do extra enforcement. And from experience, people are still speeding on this section of roadway. So how effective has this been as a traffic calming measure? Is it a traffic calming measure? Is it a complete streets measure? Probably none of the above. It's more of an enforcement issue. So what do we talk about when we actually want to do sort of legitimate traffic calming and try to actually address the driver behavior from more than just an enforcement perspective, something like the North End Traffic Management Plan, which didn't just post 30-kilometer-hour signs, it actually provided for some infrastructure changes to the road, adding the bump outs at strategic intersections to try to calm traffic on those streets. So more than just signage, because signage alone isn't enough to change behavior, we have to do design changes to the roadway as well. An old approach to cycling infrastructure. This is King Street, again in the East End. 4-lane roadway, high volumes, high speeds, with a painted bike lane on the curb. Again, in sort of our old mindset, this is sufficient. You know, we're providing a cycling facility. It's dedicated space for cyclists. But I would bet you dollars to donuts if you did a count out on King Street here and compared it to the count on Cannon Street, we'd see a pretty dramatic difference. Why? Because we know now that separation is probably better treatment for cyclists than simply paint on the road. Increases comfort, increases that sense of dedicated space, etc. So we can see that these standards are evolving and the profession is starting to adopt them and see the value in adopting some of these different ideas. So I wanted to transition a little bit into how best the community can try to engage with the traffic engineering department. Basically, engineers are problem solvers, and that's what they like to do, is solve problems, and they do it through technical means and technical solutions. So one thing that is a good idea is to strategically identify the problem statement. So this is sort of one of the traditional problem statements in traffic engineering is reduce congestion. How can we go about reducing congestion? The solution involves easing automobile movements. That's a traditional solution. And that would involve road widenings and changes to signal timings, et cetera, et cetera. However, if we ask a different question, if the problem is instead how do we improve mobility, not focusing on the automobile piece, but just on moving people, goods, what have you, then the solution could be a little bit different. The solution could be find different ways to move people, find different ways to move goods. So we can see that it's a similar problem statement, but it leads to different potential solutions. So the second one is, again, where the profession is kind of going, and I think where the community needs to be strategic in how they're framing questions. The Kenilworth example, the problem was speeding traffic. And so the solution was different signage, different speed limits, and more enforcement. But if the problem statement had been given differently, maybe there would have been different options presented. Just something I sort of threw together to try to give a sense of influences and interactions. So the public can go through
I'm just gonna.
I need you to stand still to get.
I know. I'm working on it. Okay, so before we get started, it's been a while. I want everyone to take out your smartphones, and if you're on Twitter or you're on Facebook, this is where it kind of gets fun. So I want you to take out your smartphones. I want you to stand up, and I want you to take a selfie with the person next to you. So do it right now. I'm not kidding. Stand up, everyone up. Take out your phones. Come on, let's stretch our legs. No, it's great. Give it a try. If you've never taken a selfie before, if this is your first one, that's even better. So I call these the mandatory selfies, and I'll explain why it's important. And I want you to, if you have social media, if you have Twitter, if you have Instagram, I want you to post it. And I want you to tag me, and I'm at Mr. Bikes a Bunch. And I want you to tag the event. The hashtag is Love Your Streets or HamCLS. So there's a reason why I want you to do this, and because the reason why I get people to do this is because I think it's really important to emphasize to you guys all that it's really important that you be visible. There's 200 people in this room tonight that have taken time out of their busy schedule to be here to talk about the streets that they travel on every single day because they want to make them better. That's huge for a community the size of Hamilton. You guys should all be giving yourselves a pat on the back. You need to be making yourself visible. You need to be making yourself vocal, because you can damn sure bet that every single person that opposes the ideas that we're talking about here today is going to make themselves very visible and very vocal every time these issues come up. So this is why it's important to stay visible. So I want to just give you guys a quick background on myself. So a little bit of my story. Now, the reason I do this is because I'm a total narcissist. And I also like to talk about where I came from. Because, you know, I ride a bike most places, and people automatically assume that I'm from Vancouver, or I'm from Amsterdam, or I'm from, you know, Montreal. Truth is, I'm from Carstairs, Alberta. This is a town that has the word car in its name. It tells you something about the culture of that place. This is a place where as soon as you turn 16, you get your driver's license, you get whatever car you can afford, and you start to drive. I remember driving, this is my high school in the background, I remember driving from there to the convenience store at lunch. It was 300 meters away. I clocked it last time I was at home. So that's the kind of community I grew up in. In 2007, I moved to Toronto, and I lived in Kensington Market. And I discovered the joy of walkable places, of places where I could actually explore by foot, human scale or kind of development. And you know, at the same time, I also discovered the TTC. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Toronto Transit Commission, but I got really tired of waiting for it. One night, it took me 2 hours to get to a place where it normally took me 45 minutes. And I said, the heck with this. I saw these people going by me on their bikes. And at 23 years old, having not been on a bike since I was 12, I decided I'm going to get back on a bike. And so I went out the next day, and I bought my 1982 Peugeot, which I still have. This thing is my baby. It's my beater bike, and I love it to death. And this blew the city wide open for me. It really did, because what it did is it showed me neighborhoods that were beyond my walking reach. It showed me that this was the fastest way to get around a congested city. And it showed me that I didn't need to rely on a car to get places that I used to think were really far away. So in 2011, my wife came into our room one day and she said, I got into medical school, we're moving to Hamilton. And my first thought was, oh. Because the only vision of Hamilton I ever had was coming over the Skyway Bridge. And I discovered this city that was alive with culture, that was this place where there were all sorts of social capital building up. And that was really exciting to me. And so I really dug in to the city of Hamilton, and I loved everything about it except the streets. And I think that's really indicative of how a lot of people feel. They love this city, but they don't love the streets. They don't love how the grid network is laid out. They don't love how traffic moves. And I think it's really hard to truly love a place where you live if you don't love your streets. They are the largest piece of public infrastructure that we have in our city. They take up more public space than anything else we have in Hamilton. So it's really important to really get to, be involved in what's going on with your streets. So how many of you guys, like me, used to read Choose Your Own Adventure books? Okay, wow, that's actually awesome. I didn't think there would be that many. So I always loved reading to the end and finding, kind of the good outcomes and trying to figure out how I could get to it, right? Do you guys too? Yeah. So I'm going to offer you guys a little bit of a kind of sneak preview, one of the end pieces of my presentation. So here's kind of a shocker. I don't actually care that much about cycling. So I'm going to leave that with you guys, and I'm going to talk to you for 15 more minutes about cycling. But I'll leave that with you. I don't care that much about cycling. So let's talk about where Hamilton's at. So we've got this cycling master plan, shifting gears, 2009. A good plan at that time, I would say. Not an exemplary plan, but a good plan. What it's left us with is a network of relatively fragmented, relatively kind of 1.0 bike lanes. So bike lanes that really cater to people that look like me, kind of the strong and aggressive cyclist, or to the enthusiastic and confident. It doesn't really reflect family cycling, cycling for people that are maybe not quite as aggressive as I am on the roads, and that's a problem, because if you want to get more people cycling, you need to make them feel safe. So we've also got this at the provincial level. Just kind of real quick, because I'm also like a total policy nerd on this kind of stuff, but we've got Ontario's first cycling strategy update in over 20 years, and this includes some pretty big things, like the direction to make Ontario the best province in the country for cycling, so we've got to overtake Quebec and BC. But it also includes some infrastructure funding for cycling-specific infrastructure. It includes some new design guidelines. It includes a whole bunch of stuff that lets municipalities play within a bigger sandbox that includes more cycling infrastructure. So it's pretty great. But despite that, we've got a lot of roads that still look like this. So this is Cannon Street, as I'm sure you all know. And so I saw Cannon Street, and I was really fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, to be approached by a couple of people named Leisha Knopf and Kevin Makins, who were my kind of co-conspirators in Yes We Can. And I was a cog in this great big community-powered machine called Yes We Can. And this was one of the biggest kind of community engagement pieces that Hamilton has ever seen. And it took a street like Cannon Street, and it turned it into something that is exemplary in Ontario. It's Ontario's longest stretch of protected two-way cycling infrastructure. It's our first real cycle track in Ontario, so it really is something that I'm pretty impressed with. And so it took that, and of course now it looks like this. So it's more kind of cycling 2.0, starting to get to the people that we heard from during Yes We Can, and that said, I'd love to ride my bike more, but I don't feel safe. So this kind of starts to solve some of those problems. We do have the bike share. I think it's great. We've talked about it a lot. I heard a really cool quote about how important bike share can be, and someone described it as if a UFO landed in the middle of the city. That's how transformative it can be. So, I'm really excited for this to hit the ground. Now, I want to just shift gears really quick, and I want to talk about something that happened recently. Has anyone been following what's been going on Herkimer and Charlton? Okay, so we've got a few. So Herkimer and Charlton had some bike lanes proposed on them, and they were kind of these traditional 1.0 bike lanes, where the bike lane went right by basically the driver's side of the door. And the reason why these are dangerous is because every single car has a driver. And when that door pops open in front of you, your choices are go up and over the handlebars or go out into traffic. Neither one's very good. So the community said no. I really like the fact that we've all got the red X's in our presentation. It's a good unifying theme. We need like the Family Feud buzzer for next time. But I work in the active transportation industry. This is what I do for a living. I'm very fortunate. So I'm used to seeing communities say no to bike lanes. It kind of happens all the time. What doesn't happen all the time is a community say no because it's not good enough. That was something that was really unique because the community said, no, we don't want your crappy 1.0 bike lane in the door zone. We want something more like this, where it's protected by the parked cars. And this is actually in Montreal. This is a picture I took when I was there in August. And you know, it would be the other way. You wouldn't have the car doors, the driver doors opening. It would actually be the passenger doors that would open into the bike lane. But not every car's got a passenger. And so it means that there's fewer incidences of cyclists getting doored. And the biggest danger for dooring for cyclists is not when they actually get hit by the door. It's when they have to swing out into traffic unexpectedly and are then hit by oncoming cars. So all that to say there's a lot of capital built up around complete streets in Hamilton. And you know, I really think that in Hamilton here, we've got to acknowledge that we've got a pretty significant weakness. And our weakness is these great, big, super fast one-way streets. And we've got all sorts of them. We've got Main Street, where it's 5 lanes wide. We've got Wellington Street, 4 lanes wide. We've got things like Wilson Street, 4 lanes wide, again. The kind of cool thing about all this, though, is there's not really anywhere else in Ontario that's got all this excess road capacity. So we've got a ton of excess capacity on our roads, and we can do something different with them. And the neat thing is, the conversation is really starting to change at the city level because they're realizing that all that excess lane means a lot of excess money spent. So they're starting to have those conversations around how they can use those existing resources better. So in a time of limited public resources, we need to start talking about how we do more with less. And doing more with less never results in more single occupant vehicles. It's as simple as that. So, I just need to fast forward. There we go. Okay. So I've laid out where we're at. We know what we need to improve, so now what? So how many people have seen something like this, a die-in? Has anyone else seen a die-in before? This is like where a bunch of cyclists lay down on the road and draw chalk outlines around themselves to signify all the dead cyclists. And you know, these are I kind of call this advocacy 1.0. When you're on the outside looking in, you really want to you want to make a splash, but you want to do so in a way that's kind of poking the decision makers in the eye. And I call that kind of advocacy 1.0. Now I want to show you this picture, and this is another selfie. And this is a friend of mine, Scott Bricker. Scott Bricker is the executive director of Bike Pittsburgh. And so this is a picture Scott took when he was in Copenhagen. Now the reason this picture is actually important is because, not of Scott, but because of the person behind him. That's the mayor of Pittsburgh. That's Mayor Bill Peduto. He went on a cycling trip with Scott to Copenhagen. Since Bill Peduto was elected, they've built 8.5 kilometers of protected bike lanes through their downtown. Do you think that was a coincidence that that happened? That is because while protests put cycling in the media, relationships put it on the agenda. There's a great saying I've heard at a couple different conferences. If you're not at the table, odds are you're on the menu. So you really need to make sure that you're at the table. And here in Hamilton, we're at that point. We're no longer fighting to get our foot in the door, to be at the table to talk about complete streets. We're there. We're at Advocacy 2.0. We just need to make sure that we are keeping the pressure on and providing effective, helpful advocacy as we move forward. How many people know where this is? Anyone take a guess? Anyone? Utrecht, sure. It's Copenhagen, actually, this one. Yeah, I know. It could be any one of the cycling meccas that we get a lot of people talking about. So this is where, for people like me, this is what we want to see our cities become. But the problem is that so many of our decision makers and the people that we're talking to, this is their lived day to day. And they can't see how they can ever possibly get from where they are to where we want them to be. They can't see how they're going to get from that to that. They just don't understand. So we need to be able to spell it out for them in a very step-by-step way. So we need to talk about places like Missoula, Montana more. How many people have heard of Missoula, Montana? Yeah, we've got a couple, all right. So Missoula is this small town in the middle of Montana, and they have like 5 to 8% of their population riding their bikes every day. To put that in perspective, if we saw that in Hamilton, we'd have between 25 and 40,000 cyclists on our road every day. So, these are the places where they're seeing huge booms in cycling because they're making investments. Or Indianapolis. What city could be more associated with car culture than Indianapolis? Their main economic driver is a bunch of dudes driving around 500 times around a circle. And yet, they've built this fantastic 13-kilometer cultural trail that connects 5 of their communities together. It's resulted in billions in development in Indianapolis. Billions with a B. This is huge for their city. They're becoming a draw to young people. They're becoming a place where families want to live and where businesses want to establish themselves. We need to talk about places like Washington, D.C., where they've made the hard decisions on some of the roads that were congested, and they've said, nope, we're going to take away a lane of traffic anyways, because unless we start to get rid of sidewalks or our historic buildings, we can't fit any more cars on them. So we need to start thinking about how we move people, not cars. So that's how we start to get past a couple of these things. Now, I want to talk really quickly about adrenaline and dopamine. So I'm going to get into like neuroscience here. And I'm no neuroscientist, so pardon me if there's anyone in the room that knows a lot more about this than I do. I'm going to really simplify it. There's 2 receptors that are important to me as an advocate. The first one is adrenaline, the second one is dopamine. This is what adrenaline looks like. Adrenaline's the fight or flight hormone. So basically, if you walk into a room and you tell someone they're wrong, if they can't run away, they're going to fight you. They've identified you as an enemy. They're going to disagree with everything you say. They're going to dig in their heels. They're going to solidify their position. You're not going to get anything done. Dopamine, on the other hand, dopamine's this wonderful thing that signifies that you're working together to accomplish a shared goal. Even if you might not normally agree on everything, if you can find those shared goals and move things together, that's how you start to make progress. So dopamine identifies you as a friend, and then you're able to start making more kind of beneficial decisions together. This is Tom Jackson. How many people know who Tom Jackson is? Tom Jackson's a city councilor here in Hamilton. He's been a councilor for almost as long as I've been alive. And Tom is not what you would call the most bike-friendly councilor. He's one of only 2 councilors that's used his veto authority. And I met with Tom when we were talking about the Yes We Can and bike lane. And Tom says to me, I'm all for cycling. I've built trails and I'm all for the recreational stuff, but I just don't see the demand for commuter cycling. And I said to him, Tom, you haven't built anything for them. So of course there's no demand. And I told him about Indianapolis. And I told him about all the different places that have built protected bike infrastructure and seen dramatic rises in their number of cyclists. And guess what that did? Very little. Because we couldn't agree that there was a demand. What we could agree on was that the picture on the right looks like a nicer place to be than the picture on the left. And from there, we were able to have a conversation about why the revitalization of Cannon Street was so important. And Tom ended up supporting the vote, not once, not twice, but thrice when it came before council. So this is why relationships and dopamine are so important, because we could throw all the stats and data we wanted at them. We brought this data sheet, we brought the fact sheets, we brought the infographics. But in the end, the stories, the people, the emotion was the thing that was so important. Because without that, it's just a wall of stats. And people don't connect with stats. They connect with people. So we need to connect as people first. We need the data to back us up. Don't get me wrong. But the data is there. 2014 has been the strongest year for data in North America as far as cycling and walking goes. So, at Share the Road, the organization I work for, we do polling every year, and we find such broad support for cycling investment all across the province. No matter how we ask the question, no matter what we ask, we see at least 60% of Ontarians agree with investing more in cycling. Simple as that. This is a great slide from New York City. When they installed protected bike lanes, they found that all injuries on the road, so this is injuries to drivers, to pedestrians, to cyclists, everyone, all injuries went down. It's safer for everyone. Now the really, there's higher retail sale too. The really cool thing about this one that's not on this slide, they found that while incidences of speeding on that corridor went down, the median speed of traffic traveling went up. So the average person who wasn't an idiot and speeding to get from light to light and causing delays by their irrational behavior trying to get ahead of people, the average person was moving through that corridor faster after a lane was taken away and given to a protected bike lane. Holy smokes. Can you imagine that? Other data, I'd be remiss if I didn't include the rise of protected bike lanes, because we're going to be on this map very soon. So everywhere that protected bike lanes and great cycling infrastructure is installed, the number of cyclists explodes, without fail. I have yet to, I've asked the question to dozens of opponents, probably in the hundreds now, and I've said, show me one place where it doesn't work. Just one. And they haven't been able to. So until they can, we're not debating on data, we're debating on base emotion. But that's the problem. Because the data is clear. I mean, even the Federal Highway Administration in the States is saying that on every metric that matters, on vehicular miles traveled, on healthcare costs, on injuries to the road, on road maintenance costs, every single thing that matters, cycling and pedestrian infrastructure is beneficial. But emotions get in the way. So we need to find a way to connect with these people. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm getting a little parched. As I do. I don't know why I did that. Okay. People don't like feeling like they're losing something. And every time we talk about complete streets, we talk about bike lanes, we talk about pedestrian infrastructure. I don't know if you guys have been following what's going on in Toronto. They decided to say that they're going to come out and they're going to narrow lanes in Toronto. And a bunch of people said, you can't do that. You can't take away 2 feet from our traffic lanes. It's going to cause traffic chaos, despite all studies to the contrary. They don't like losing something. Even if that's that useless 2 feet that you don't need in a lane, they don't like losing something. So we need to emphasize to people that we're not taking anything away. We're giving things back. We're giving back the opportunity for activity and safety and family time with their children. You know, how many people in here walked or biked to school as a kid? In 20 years, when we ask that question, the number of hands that goes up is going to be less than a third of what we have in this room. That is a terrifying statistic. If you are someone involved in public health, terrifying. Because that is a huge generational shift in how we are moving as children. So, we need to be able to give that option back to people, to walk and bike to their schools with their kids again. Choice and freedom. Complete streets are about using the right tool for the job. Now, I don't know if any of you guys know this, but I'm a bit of a wizard in the kitchen. You know, not to brag or anything. I won a TV show called Come Dine With Me Canada. No big deal. Anyway, I know, right? Moving on. So I know my way around the kitchen. And I've got these two things that I really love in my kitchen. I've got my knife and I've got my food processor. Now, my knife is my everyday tool. I use it every single day, whether it's for chopping apples, cutting carrots, you know, making soup, whatever I need to do. Usually, it's the knife. Now, when I have big jobs, when I need to make salsa or like, you know, I'm making a great big batch of soup or company's coming over and I'm making a big batch of hummus, well, then I'll bring out the food processor. So it's about using the right tool for the job. Now, I wouldn't be much use if you took away my knife in the kitchen and you said, nope, you can't use this. Use your food processor to peel that apple. Well, I wouldn't be very good at that. The food processor is the biggest, most expensive, most high-powered device I have in my kitchen. But that doesn't mean it's the right tool for every single job. And so if we take away people's choice to use everything but the biggest, most expensive, most high-powered tool to get them around, then we're kind of robbing them of that choice, and we're forcing them to use the wrong tool for the job. That's that 55% of trips under 1 kilometer in Hamilton that are being taken by car. That's the wrong tool for the job. We need to give people the choice back. Complete streets mean complete freedom. It means the choice to use whatever you want to do to get around. You know, we hear a lot of black and white conversations around complete streets. You know, people say, well, you just want to get everyone out of your cars. You want to ban cars from the road. You want to give all the roads to cyclists and pedestrians. No. I don't want to force anyone to get out of their car. I just don't want to feel like I'm going to die every time I don't take mine. Right? So that's how we need to start talking about these things. We also need to start talking about this money. Because owning and operating a vehicle here in Ontario costs us $8,000 to $10,000 a year. If you've got a family that is taking all those 1 kilometer and under trips with a second car, they're spending a whole lot more every year. That's a lot of money that's leaving the local economy. If we can get families to go from 2 cars to 1 car, using transit, using cycling, using walking, using car share, using all these other transportation options that are becoming available to us, we get a lot more money in our local economy, and we get a lot happier, healthier, more sustainable communities. So this is kind of getting close to the end here. We had a couple things happen in Hamilton. Does anyone know where this is? This is Queen Street. Queen Street was completely rebuilt from the ground up. This was such a tremendous opportunity for our city to provide safe pedestrian and cycling access up the mountain. Instead, they rebuilt it without any consideration for cycling pedestrian access. You know why? Because it wasn't in the cycling master plan, and it was done before the pedestrian mobility plan came along. These are 20-year pieces of infrastructure, folks. That's going to be like that for 20 years because there's no opportunity to rebuild the roadbed. This is what Main Street could look like, and they did a resurfacing, and instead this is what we got. These are misses on catastrophic scales, and we cannot afford to continue building a city that looks like it's looked for the last 60 years. Every time we do an infrastructure investment, it is a 20-year investment. We need to start building the city we want to see 20 years in the future, not the city we've seen for the last 60. And that is why this is so important and why I'm so happy that there's so many people in this room, because that, to me, indicates that these big misses are going to become less and less prevalent. So thank you all for being here for that. Now, I told you earlier, I don't care about cycling, and then I continued to talk at you for 15, 20 minutes about cycling. But what I really care about, folks, is I really care about communities. I care about places where children can walk or bike to school. I care about places where people know their neighbors' faces, not their license plates and auto makes. I care about places where your shop owners know who you are, where you spend money locally, where people are happy, healthy, and connected to the place they live. And it just so happens that walking and cycling happen to be really good indicators of that. And that's what we need to emphasize. It's not about how people move around so much. It's about how people connect with the communities in which they live. And you don't connect when you go door to door in a big metal box. You just don't. You connect when you're out there at human scale. And that's what walking and cycling is all about. So I'm going to give you my 3 takeaways that are kind of like the sum-ups of what I've talked about. Thing number 1, build on what we have. So I talked a lot about what we've got. We've heard a lot about that tonight. And then start to move forward with those. So identify the places where you can make the most difference and then build on those. Take away the reasons to say no. Tell stories, use data. If you need support from the community, tap people on the shoulder. That's what we did with Yes We Can. And how many people did we talk to? Did we run into anyone here at our first art crawl in May of 2013? Yeah, we had a few. Awesome. So the thing for me was so exciting and so interesting about when we went out there is we were asking people, we were standing out there saying, you want to sign a petition? People kept walking. We said, it's about bike lanes on Cannon. People turned around. It was so remarkable because there's such a desire to see change in a positive way in this city. And then the final thing, we need to make the Complete Streets tent bigger. We need to make people realize this isn't about just the downtown. This isn't about just the people who live on Cannon Street. This is about the people who live on Stone Church, who live, up on Rymel, who live near Garth. And at the end of the day, Sarah showed that map. It's not the downtown hipsters looking at their phones that are being killed on our roads. It's suburban grandparents. So we need to start building age-friendly communities too. So that's my whole presentation. I want to just kind of say thank you so much for all of you coming out, and hopefully you have some good questions, and hopefully we kind of inspired you to do some good stuff.
Great, thanks, Justin. Okay, so I hope everyone enjoyed all those presentations. Maybe slightly longer than anticipated, because everyone here is very passionate about Complete Streets, about our streets. And I'm sure everyone else out here is too. So we are going to get started with our panel discussion and question and answer period. We'll try to stick to about 15 minutes so we can get back on time. And our moderator for the evening is Ryan McGrill from Raise the Hammer. So I'll ask him to come up now and start taking your questions.
Thank you all. Am I on? Okay. Nicholas Keplahan, who I think is in here somewhere, is a longtime Raise the Hammer contributor. And years ago, he coined the term amateur urbanist. And I just love that, and I proudly call myself an amateur urbanist. But we're very fortunate to have a panel of professionals here, professional urbanists, professional transportation planners, professional engineers. And I'm very excited that we have the opportunity to pick their brains a little bit. So we've got, like Maria said, we've got about 15 minutes or so. After that, we can kind of play it by ear. Maybe I can check in and see if people want to call it a night or kind of take one or two more questions. But so we will open the floor to questions. If I can just ask people, respect everybody's time. A lot of people have come out tonight. It's fantastic. Make sure your questions are actually questions and not like manifestos, try to focus on really kind of tapping into the expertise we have here so that as citizens, we can take more out of this and we can go out into our communities and make more of these kinds of things happen. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, one close to the back here.
Hi. Thanks everyone for the good presentations. There was a lot of talk about the upcoming Transportation Master Plan review. Can you just speak a little bit more about the process and how people can get involved?
I'm a computer engineer, but I don't know how to use these things. Hello? Yeah, so it's just starting. The process is just getting kicked off actually this week with staff. And there will be public engagement sessions, traditional ones. There'll be online engagement as well through various tools and social media. So it's going to be a little different than 2007, where we had a few PICs, or following traditional sort of scope of the TMP. And we're going to get hopefully into where people are. We want to be where people are rather than where we want them to come to. And partially, we had a Complete Streets sort of engagement. This is sort of leading up. We had 3 or 4 sessions like this one as well, trying to lead up and gather your ideas. We want to get people's ideas on the back wall here, and we want to help integrate that into how we engage the public during the Transportation Master Plan period. So right now, we're just getting kicked off, but there will be opportunities to comment on all the different aspects, because obviously, I've never been able to read the whole thing. And I literally work in the department in which created the TMP in the first place. So, I don't know if that's good or bad, don't quote me. So, I think that what's important too is that we want to get something more readable to the public. So yeah, we're going to have, there'll be this much paper, right? Don't print it, it's back in the environment. But we want to get out something that's also really summarize the document very well and very concisely. So we are working on that. We want to engage people on how do they want to get this information, because it's so much. So there'll be a lot of various ways for input, and then various ways to how do we disseminate the information. We don't want it to just sit on the floor collecting dust.
Yes, question from here.
A general dimensional question to anyone in the panel. There's some talk that some of the drive lanes were narrowed down. What would constitute the minimum or the minimum dimension for a travelled lane for a roadway in order to provide excess room to put bike lanes in?
Every municipality has its own standard, but as a start, what Toronto has recently come out with was they said that their minimum is now going to be 3 meters, which someone else astutely pointed out is actually the very old standard, 10 feet. So it's kind of going back, it's sort of things are kind of coming full circle, where our minimums kind of increased. So the minimums went up to, and this is getting very wonkish technical, I apologize, but you know, a lot of places were at 3.35 meters, where they came up with that number, I don't really know. But in urban settings, 3 meters is perfectly appropriate. And again, the narrower the lane, the more the signal to the driver that speeding is a less comfortable option. So narrowing is one of the most effective ways to calm traffic and to slow traffic. So 3 meters is perfectly appropriate in an urban setting. So that's what Toronto is going back to. And I think that's something that probably in the Transportation Master Plan update, that would be a good piece of feedback to be hearing from the community, is to say that, you know, this 3 meter standard is perfectly appropriate in an urban setting like Hamilton.
I think it's also important just to kind of weigh in on how you talk about what narrowing the lane does. Because when people hear it's going to slow traffic, they hear it's going to add time to my commute. What we need to kind of switch our language to is it's going to rationalize how traffic moves. It's going to create less unpredictability, it's going to create more stability, and for the average driver, the person that's not speeding or driving aggressively, it's either going to leave your commute time about the same, or it's going to improve it, because unpredictability is the thing that slows traffic down. So it actually will rationalize and in some cases improve how traffic moves. So it's just a language thing, but so important when you talk about slowing traffic, everyone gets up in arms. When you talk about normalizing how traffic moves, people are okay with it.
We also talked about reducing dangerous speeding as opposed to slowing traffic. Question from the front here? Oh, right, very front. Yep.
I come across the city regularly on bicycle from Stony Creek, about 15 kilometers. Almost all the streets between here and there have been repaved in the last 2 to 3 years. I haven't seen any changes in those streets as a result, except that they've got new pavement on them. When is that complete streets policy going to start being implemented, and what's it going to look like in those residential neighborhoods?
The City of Hamilton doesn't have a complete streets policy right now. They have sort of components of it. So the cycling master plan. So basically, if those streets were not on the cycling master plan, basically the city does not plan to put cycling facilities on them. And that's what would change. That's one of the things that would change with the complete streets policy, is that there wouldn't be, every street could have a cycling facility if it was context appropriate. Not every street needs it, but it wouldn't be something that's set 5 years in advance. It could be looked at every year. Okay, we're repaving this. How safe is it for cyclists? Oh, it's changed. Okay, we're going to add a cycling facility. So the reason why there hasn't been is changes that you expect is that there's been, you know, as Pete said, kind of ad hoc changes, but there hasn't been that policy level change in terms of complete streets. The one big change, though, has been the adoption of the pedestrian master plan, which got adopted around this time last year, pedestrian mobility master plan. And that one does have quite a bit of teeth. Well, it doesn't really have teeth because it doesn't talk about exceptions, but it has, it kind of says you should do all this stuff, but it doesn't talk about, well, what if you can't do this stuff? How does that get decided? But the pedestrian, but that's so new, so it hasn't really, we haven't seen the implementation of it yet. So yeah, we're not there yet, and that's why we need to take the momentum from tonight and continue it into the transportation master plan and make sure that it becomes stronger.
Do we have any questions maybe from the back or from the sides? Oh, someone in the back corner here. Yes.
I'm kind of a detail-oriented person, so I was wondering if, is there any data on how the weather affects bike usage? I'm thinking more like October to March. And then secondly, we talked about the chip in the bike. Is there data, and I guess I'd like to know Montreal, because when I saw what was up there, I was trying to think of something more like the weather in Hamilton, and Montreal is probably the best fit for that. Does the chip track data on like the dates and times these bikes are used? And do we have any data? Because we don't have any here. Do we have it elsewhere?
Okay, I'm from Montreal, so I want to answer this question. I mean, I've been here for 10, 12 years, but until I came here, I had never left Montreal for more than a month. And in Montreal, it has similar weather, it has worse weather. I mean, here it's banana belt in terms of snow. The snow there is terrible. And for many years, they closed the bike lanes from November 1st to April 1st. And then they've started to realize, hey, you know what? Actually, there's lots more people who are still cycling way past that time. And so now they have this white bike lanes, they call them, that they clear the snow and keep all year round. There's obviously cycling is to a certain extent weather dependent, but I still see lots of cyclists in mild winter weather. There was a year that I cycled the whole winter. It's one of those perverse, horrible climate change things. We don't want the climate to get warmer, but when it is getting warmer, and it does help cycling, winter cycling. And the second part of the question was about bike share and the chips and the data. The technology is so new that only this week, in fact, in Phoenix and Tampa, I believe, 2 systems got launched from the same technology, and so just this week is that technology in widespread use. So there is data from Hoboken from last year. You can talk to the bike share people, would be great.
Just to speak on their behalf a little bit, like you asked about what will the bikes, what data will they collect? They will collect data. They won't collect the weather data, but we overlay the weather data, and we know the time of day, location, and where people have actually cycled, the route that they cycled. So we can overlay weather data on top of the bike share user data. So I think that's will be a very important tool actually. And we also have an AT counts page, so we are counting right now on the streets. We have specialized counters, and we're bringing in more specialized counters. And we do track weather data and cycling data on routes, and also we track pedestrian data. We track data at the stairs, who's using the stairs, who's using the trails, not who particularly, but in terms of numbers. So we are collecting that data as we speak. The bike share data will complement that.
Just one word about winter. The winter does come up. Like, why should we build bike lanes? They don't get used all year. Why should we do that just for 6 months of the year? We built, I believe, a twin pad arena that gets used how many times a year? And we have many cycling winter facilities that are just winter, and we still spend money on them. It's important, and they have importance, and so do cycling facilities.
I would just add, anecdotally, last week when we had some snow in Hamilton, I took a few photographs of the bike lanes with a fresh dusting of snow on them, and they were absolutely riddled with cycle tracks. Obviously cyclists are using them. Not as many, but there are still some who will ride almost anywhere.
I think, so the data that I could speak to, I think, comes from a couple of American cities that have prioritized winter cycling. Minneapolis and Madison, Wisconsin. So again, these are places that have worse winters than we have here. And they typically see about 40% of their kind of peak summer usage continue to ride through the winter. And primarily in those cities, it's because they clear priority routes with the same priority that they would clear priority car routes. I think that it's important to emphasize that you really do get the transportation system you plan for. If we didn't get out and plow the roads, I don't think a whole lot of people would be, driving their little compacts around in winter as well. Everyone would probably have, great big trucks or Hummers or, in some places, in some winters, like last year, tanks might be best. But, we get the transportation system we plan for, and if you make it accessible for people to ride, and it's predictable, and that's what's so important. is that it needs to be predictably done. Then you see that people start to take the initiative to continue riding all year round. You're never going to see the same ridership that you see in the summer months, but you know, we can see half that ridership, and I think that would be a success as far as the investment that we're making in it.
We have time for one more question. Are there any questions from over here? We haven't had any from this side of the room yet. No? Okay.
There's one right here.
Oh, okay, here we go.
There's one at the back too. He had his hand up like the whole time.
Hey, I'm just wondering if there's any plans to, I noticed on the map that none of the hubs for the bike shares were up the mountain. And I'm wondering if there's any plans to expand it up the mountain. And also if there's any plans to make accessibility between the mountain and downtown easier for bikes.
Sorry, could you comment on the east end as well, please? If that's okay.
Okay, so first of all, the bike share people are Sean and Chelsea right there. So hi, Sean and Chelsea. The bikes are our first ever Hamilton bike's actually right here. That's an active bike, first one in the network. There are 5 mountain escarpment stations, 4 on Concession Street and 1 in front of Mohawk College. So they're our first foray onto the escarpment, and they're just the beginning. And we're testing to see how well they will be used up there in sort of a, you know, Concession Street's next to Ottawa Street, or you know, just like I think there's a lot going on there, and that can really, with the dense streets, right, compact urban form, I think that it can support cycling, actually a lot of cycling especially with bike share. So that said, you can see on the map there's 2 areas of expansion. The one is going to be to the east, and you see as we're building, we want to build the east, and we want to go all the way to Ottawa Street. So you see it's trying to reach out there if you look at the map, and it's also trying to reach up on the map. So there's 2. Those are our obvious next places to go. And as soon as we get some real good data and actual bikes on the street, we can start about looking at the expansion plans from there.
Peter, can I just... So just because I'm also a data guy too, when you take a look at bike share systems across North America, I read a really good article the other day, and one of the kind of experts in this field has said it's better to have a system that's dense and compact and functioning really well, and have people demanding it expand, than to have a system that's too spread out and isn't doing its job and then just fails. So we need to see bike share up on the mountain, we need to see it in the East End, but we need to see it succeed first. And the number one thing that makes bike share, that determines whether or not a bike share succeeds, is density of stations and availability of bikes. Nothing else matters as much as that when you take a look at the successful bike share schemes. So please, please be patient. Because if we try and push it too hard, too far, too fast, and spread it out too thin, it will fail. If we grow it organically, then we can have the best bike share system in Canada.
Okay, so it's about 5 after 9 right now. Do we want to take a couple more questions, or does everyone want to get out of here? I think we can probably push it just a little bit, but I don't want to try people's patience if people are ready to wrap it up at this point. Show of hands if you want to take a couple more questions. Okay, so I hope not all of you have a question, because maybe we can. Sure, you have a question.
My question is, how can we improve the level of design engineering competence in city staff? And maybe Matt can comment on this. Let me give a couple of examples of what I would call design engineering incompetence. Well, one that we already saw up here was the proposal on Herkimer, that door zone bike lanes, where the bike lane is the most dangerous place on the entire road to ride your bike.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop you there. There's lots of examples, but let's get straight to the question.
Sure. And, well, the question is, what can we do to improve the level of design engineering competence? Hunter Street's another one. Now, these violate design engineering standards, the benchmark being the Dutch Crow standard. We don't see that for cars. You don't see amateur engineers saying, hey, those city staff plans to build that bridge for cars, it's going to fall down. How do we make that better?
So I'm going to field this one because I don't want Pete or Matt to have to, because they're city staff. But I just work with a lot of city staff. So the main way that we do this is we educate ourselves a little bit better around what the standards are now. And you know, I think it's really important to your point to note that actually, and this is getting a little techie and wonky, up until 2014, we actually didn't have a bikeway design standard that was really anywhere near up to date here in Ontario. And so while there were other design standards in North America and across the world, like the CRO standards, like you mentioned, those weren't necessarily approved by the Professional Engineers of Ontario or by kind of North American standards. And so if someone went out on a limb and decided, I'm going to design something according to CRO standards, and something happened and it was found that they weren't using what was in the design guidelines, they could be held liable. And people are very risk averse when it comes to this, and we need to understand that this is an incremental change. And we recognize, I think, that there are better standards out there than what we're using. Book 18, you know, I mean, if you take a look, it's the cycling design standards now for Ontario. It's a great manual if you look at the best practices. If you look at the lowest practices, then you end up with crappy infrastructure. But, you know, we didn't have these a year ago, even. If we would have been sitting here talking, we didn't have these a year ago. So, you know, it really is incremental change. And, you know, I think a lot of it too, every time I kind of go and I listen to young traffic engineers, it's always entertaining because I always think they don't want to build the kind of stuff that's getting built right now. And so, you know, I think in 20 years, they're going to have a hard time. It's going to be impossible to find someone that wants to build, you know, a road that looks anything remotely like Cannon Street used to. So that's kind of my answer to it, and I think that, okay.
You want it? I've already said so much, why stop now? I think that one other piece to this is that we've got great policy. We're going to build some great policy. The TMP, let's say it's the most amazing policy that we've ever developed. You know, you've got to get that policy into action, and one way to do that is design guides. And you know, our design guides we've done a few updates to them over time, but I think look at Calgary, their design guides are called their Complete Streets Design Guidelines. So it's not that we don't have people who have technical ability. We have very good people who can build different street elements very well, but do we have the right guidelines in place that implement the policies that we're working on? So I think that's one thing that we really want to focus on in the near future is, okay, let's take a look at all this great stuff that we engage the public with and we all believe in and the council has approved, and get that into the practitioners' hands who are actually going to design the streets and say these are the new guidelines, because essentially we're following what our guidelines are how to implement our policy. If they're old, our policy is new. It doesn't matter how new our policy is. We've got to get those guidelines up to date as well. And that's what we're going to work on. That's what we are working on right now, but we need to, obviously, that's going to be informed by our new policies. And remember, our new OP was just approved. So, sorry. DDM, OP. So, yes, our OP just got approved. We're going to update the zoning bylaw because of that new OP. We've got our TMP, so everything is following that official plan approval. So, and then that's going to, it takes time, but that's going to get into our design guidelines. And that's when we're going to see this implemented full stream, just like you see what's implemented right now on the street today, based on our older design guidelines. Thank you.
Okay, here's the front of the question.
Yes, sure.
I think this is the last one.
Sorry, my question goes back a bit to winter cycling and then looking at changing the way that we approach infrastructure and looking at maybe even the cleaning of streets. And my question is really about when the wintertime comes and we've got snow and everything in bike lanes, is there a look in the city of Hamilton to changing the priority of snow clearing and things like that? Is that being considered? Because I know that if we have areas regularly cleared or something, as you were saying, predictability is helpful in terms of getting people out there cycling even in the more difficult months.
Toronto has a policy, a clear policy, public, and like the first thing that they clear is contraflow bike lanes. They have quite a few. We only have one in Hamilton. King Street, yes, true. And well, Canada's not contraflow. Anyway, never mind. And and Hamilton doesn't really. Hamilton has a policy for Cannon Street, but doesn't have for the others. It's kind of like if we have time, if we have money. And so really, it's the kind of thing where we should all be writing, anyone who anything, this is like one of my #1 things, is learn this email address by heart and use it all the time. Once a week, send some email to askcity@hamilton.ca. The very nice customer service people there will forward your request. And yes, it might not always get done, but I'm actually quite surprised at how many things get done when I just email Ask City. You know, when you see like a pedestrian light facing the wrong way, or you know, a street light out, or yeah, they're not. I cycled and I couldn't cycle because of that. They record these. Number of complaints makes a difference, so we have to complain. We have to be vocal.
I think it goes to, again, it's one of those things that's evolving, getting out of silos. So I think the way things have been done traditionally is that one department will do something and then everyone else has to catch up kind of after the fact, and there's not a lot of intercommunication that goes on. And that's not to say that that's reflective of the situation now, but I think that's the sort of thing that's changing, and Canada's a great example of that, where the winter maintenance piece was built right into the proposal to build the Cannon Street cycle track. Whereas in other projects, that sort of thing is, again, it gets considered, but it's not integrated holistically, and I think we're moving now towards more of a process where everything is considered holistically. So actually being conscious of the fact that yes, you have to set aside budget for better snow clearing equipment, more staff to go out and do it, prioritizing routes, all these different things which may not have been considered in the past when looking at building a cycling network. But again, with the latest example of Cannon Street, where that was considered, that's the step forward. And it's, as Justin said, sort of that we have that now, so leveraging that and moving forward with it and trying to make sure that everything going forward from now follows that same standard.
All right, thank you all very much for coming out. It's exciting to see. Oh, okay. One more last
Mary's
final
done
question.
so much work in Crown Point that you get to ask.
Okay, here's the one question. Did you get
Okay.
Did you get pushback from the trucking industry when you made Cannon Street work? If you did,
Pushback from the trucking industry. Was there pushback from the trucking industry?
Not formally, which is good, because they didn't come out like the Ontario Trucking Authority didn't come out like saying anything against it, and actually the Ontario Trucking Authority is really starting to kind of understand a little bit more about the importance of cycling safety and of these kind of protected infrastructure. And I think a lot of it with the trucking industry was just a matter of telling them, you know, there's tons of capacity on that road. Let's show you the data. It's a pilot project. Pilot projects are huge, by the way. The two favorite words in any active transportation advocate's toolkit should be pilot project, because people are way more likely to support something if they think they can take it out. You know, they're going to take Cannon Street from our cold, dead hands if they try and rip it out of there. You think the community's going to let them take that out in 3 years? Are you kidding me? That thing is there permanently. I can almost guarantee it. When they see the metrics coming back from it, there's no way they're taking it out. But that's how you have to do it. You can't estimate how something's going to work unless you just do it. So pilot projects, and that helped with the trucking industry a lot.
And let me just say, there's a lot of unusual partners. So truckers, you know, you can make the argument of like, look, wouldn't you rather have the cyclists in a dedicated lane and not sharing your lane? And most truckers would agree with that. And then the CAA is an interesting partner. They're actually quite pro-active infrastructure and cycling infrastructure. I don't quite get it why exactly. You tell me why. Okay, good.
I'll tell you why. The CAA, sorry, full disclosure, I work for the Shared Road Cycling Coalition. The CAA is a major partner of ours. They're a major sponsor. And the reason why they're so pro-active transportation is because they can read the writing on the wall. And they can recognize the fact that, again, unless you start getting rid of things like sidewalks and buildings, you're not going to be able to move more cars. You need to be able to focus on how you move more people. And they recognize that there's a value proposition to their membership if people are safer on the roads and if the roads are safer for all road users. They see the data. They're smart people. They recognize that multimodal complete streets are safer for everyone. They provide insurance. Fewer collisions means fewer payouts, means better bottom line for them. So they want to make sure that the roads are as safe as they can be for all road users. That's at the end of the day, that's why the CAA is such an amazing partner to active transportation and such an unexpected one.
And I think also, there's a fixed number of people in the city, right? Whatever the number is, 500,000 or whatever, how many people come in and out. It's pretty, yes, it's growing, but there's only so much road space. We know we can't expand the roads that much. By shifting modes, we are freeing up road space, and it isn't a selling point. It's not a sale. I'm not a salesman tactic. It's real. Like these policies are not necessarily anti-car because we're actually making traffic better for all. Traffic better and transportation better. Both things are happening at once, and every city who's done this kind of pioneering work can show that car movements improve. And I think the goods movement industry understands this point as well. It does, from at least a higher level, that if we want to move goods, we're going to have to do something else to shift auto traffic in different directions, whether that be in carpool lanes and HOV lanes, whether that be on transit and GO transit or local transit. If we don't do that, we're gonna, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're from a goods movement perspective, we're in big trouble. And I think everyone understands that together. So there's a lot of good work going on. The urban, I work in a lot of the urban environment, and the people, highway environment, and all these people are coming together to say, okay, well, we have a larger problem here in the next 15 years. How are we going to fix that problem? And Metrolink's picked up a lot of that in the big move. And as much as that's another policy document that, sometimes if you're a policy geek, it's fascinating. If you're not, you don't want to read it. But there's a lot of great things that talk about that multimodal integration. So we haven't lost that point. I think it's very important.
Okay, so apologies for stopping the Q&A session short. Our speakers and moderator, I believe, are still going to hang out around, so you can still ask them lots of questions. So please feel free to talk to them one-on-one. A few final points before you get out of your seats and I lose your attention. We have a transportation showcase in the background here, and it's great that people have already put their comments here, but please, if you have any suggestions, tips, anything that came out here that you really want the city to know about, all of that information will be tracked in the Transportation Showcase report, and Risha, who should really put her hand up, she created that showcase, and she's going to do the work to put all the information together. We've had it at a couple of events so far, so thank you to her for doing that. So please, we want to capture your input.
She'll also take your email address if you want to get involved in TMP. Someone asked me that question, and we're actually taking email addresses if you want to get further engaged in that process.
And also send out my email address and take my fact sheets.
So get their contacts before you leave tonight. Another quick thing too, you'll note the first Sobe bike is in front of us here. So if you didn't notice it before, it is actually sitting right in front here. And the Sobe people are here to take all of your questions as well in the back. So feel free to talk to them. It's exciting that it's coming to Hamilton, and if you have any burning questions to ask, go ahead and ask them. Next, upcoming event. So I mentioned that this is the first ever CLS event that we've put on, but we do have additional ones already booked. So if you want to go to the next slide back there. We have one, next slide. There we go.
I got it.
January 15th, Claiming Green, Fact or Greenwashing. February 25th, Green Buildings, Resource Conservation and Urban Regeneration. And then future events as well. There will be about 5 more or so in the new year. So we're really excited about them. And finally, to thank everyone, because I can't let you go until I thank everyone who had a part in all of this. So the CLS organizing team, thank you to all of them, and everyone who's involved in really putting this together. I probably missed some people, so I apologize if the logo's not up there, but the SPN, Sustainable Hamilton, Office Max Grand and Toy, Forward with Integrity, McMaster Student Success Center, McMaster's Committee on the Environment and Sustainability, Mac's Academic Sustainability Program Office at Mohawk College, as well as the AGH for providing this incredible venue for us. How perfect a setting to kick off our first event. There was also a generous financial contribution made by a private donor and financial support from Smart Community Hamilton. And if you want to know more about Smart Community Hamilton, there's some information over there. And finally, put some comments on that map and tell us why you love your streets. I think we all have great stories about why we love them, why we don't. So share them here, share them on Twitter, share them with us after. We will also be sending out a survey to everyone who registered through the Eventbrite or who gave their email out today. So you will have a survey to tell us what you liked or didn't like, or anything about this event, and suggest future ideas for us. We love feedback. I think that's the important part about everything that we do. I probably missed something that I was supposed to say, but either way, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Oh, right.